National Broadcasting Company presents Rupert Hughes, soldier, novelist, historian, and humorist. In his commentary, he phrases present-day history in his own entertaining style. The views expressed, however, are those of Mr. Hughes and do not necessarily represent the views of NBC. Now, Mr. Rupert Hughes.
The word hero means a great deal to us today. Practically every family has its own, in a wild alternation of those who are welcoming home their luckily still living or grieving for their sacred dead, or both. There are other heroes in the public worship. Some of them don't face or use any deadlier weapons than words. Their chief bravery consists in daring to promise us all salvation from the evils of these times and of the most ancient evils of all time. In desperate days like these, it's an easy way to win worshipers. Many of those who are most revered by those whom they are deluding are no better than the old traveling quacks who used to sell swamp root and kickapoo Indian herbs, guaranteed to cure everything from a broken leg to a broken contract. The word hero means various things to us, but to the Egyptians of 130 years before Christ, hero was a great scientist, the inventor, or at least the describer, of the steam engine. We're usually taught that James Watt invented the steam engine and got his idea as a boy from noticing that if you held a spoon over the spout of a tea kettle, the steam would finally push it away. But the original steam engines date back to Watt at least 1,800 years. We have the text in which Hero of Alexandria in Egypt describes exactly how a steam engine worked in 130 B.C. In fact, he described another engine in which hot air was used. It somewhat resembles one of Rube Goldberg's marvelous machines. But when the air grew hot, it tipped a container filled with water, spilled the water into a bucket, so made the bucket heavy enough to pull a rope over a pulley, and that opened the doors of a temple. When the hot air cooled, the water left the bucket rose and let the temple doors shut again. Since the engine and the ropes were concealed, the temple doors seemed to be opened and closed by divine power. That ingenious engine was solely used to mystify the customers of the priests of an Egyptian god. The poor worshippers saw the great doors swing wide without the touch of human hands. They believed their invisible deity himself was then present in person. The inventors kept a step ahead of the swindlers, and the swindlers kept a step ahead of the dupes. They still do. In those old Egyptian temples, excavators have also found speaking tubes in the walls and in the statues of the gods. Evidently, a priest in the cellar would roar into one end of the tube, and the sound would come booming out of the mouth of the statue, and so be taken for the voice of the god himself. Hearing it, the awestruck listeners trampled each other to put their money down where the crafty priest could reach it. So the steam engine and the megaphone are ancient inventions later lost and forgotten till reinvented. As far back as we can go in history, we find what we'll find in tomorrow morning's paper. There's always a certain part of the public just aching to squander its hard-earned cash on mystifying swindlers. For all our compulsory education, all our newspapers and books and police court exposures, there's still big money waiting for anybody who will promise the impossible. While stocks are good, but miracles always find a much readier market. Many otherwise intelligent and successful people are taken in as completely as the Egyptian fellows were by the hot air that opened and closed the temple doors. The old saying, there's a new sucker born every minute, might have been written in the oldest hieroglyphics by some Barnum of B.C. days. It was no truer then than today. Hot air, hot air. It sells for more than gold. Wise people use it to heat their homes, but others buy it to turn their skulls into teapot domes. The hot air heroes of today promise to save us from being crushed under the tyrannies of mathematics and economics. They will save us from the ancient curse of work and the primeval uncertainties of fortune. Their solution is so simple that it appeals to the simplest of simpletons, of whom a new crop is always green and growing. Their solution is simply this: let the government do it. The government will get you a job, an education, a cradle, a grave. It will feed you, clothe you, house you, bury you. You should stop and ask yourself, who is the government? You'd find, of course, that government is just a lot of people who got their jobs first and vote their own salaries and expenses. They collect taxes and pay back part of what's left. All they ask is your votes and your money. The old-fashioned politicians manage the government fairly well, and some of them were honest. The newfangled politicians offer you miracles, but who are they? For all their starry eyes and pink ideals, they turn out to be just common, everyday people like ourselves. Some of them are good actors and eloquent orators. They swing back the heaviest doors with ease. But they're in behind there with their little hidden hot air engines. All they ask is that you believe everything they tell you and that you let them take care of your money for you. They tell such a good story that it's dangerous to expose them. Critics who call them frauds are reviled as cynics with the minds of worms, selfish monsters, heartless capitalists, robbers of the poor, enemies of hope, brutes who keep the prophets from turning earth into heaven. But still the hard old facts go on being fact. 2 plus 2 continues to make 4 in spite of all the golden promises. Wealth continues to be a combination of work plus ideas plus markets. Nothing comes from nothing, and though you multiply nothing by 40 billions, it's still nothing. The men who promise 60 million jobs continue to be the men who don't actually hire anybody. They merely provide the hot air that swings wide the doors into the Temple of Hope. Once you get inside the temple, where are you? Just listening to statues that seem to talk. Economics is a word made ghastly by misuse and abuse. I once asked the great and hard-headed economist, Dr. Harley L. Lutz, in heaven's name, can you give me a definition of economics in words of one syllable? Dr. Lutz answered, yes, this is the definition. There is no such thing as free lunch. That'll bear a bit of thinking. In the old days, you went into a bar room, if you did such things, and bought a glass of beer for 5 cents. Then you could eat 25 cents worth of free crackers and sausages, cheese, and head cheese if you wanted to and hadn't any more sense. Few of the customers ever touched it. It looked to be free, but somebody was paying for it. Everybody was paying for it. Everybody pays for everything, especially for what's marked free. Communism and governmental control have been tried countless times. Their abject failures are described in the most ancient histories. Yet they're offered us today as something new. They're older than the steam engine and as fraudulent as the Egyptian door openers. The same old magic stuff, the same old gaudy promises are just as prevalent today as they were when Cleopatra drifted down the Nile in her gorgeous canal boat. Her high priest didn't use the steam engine for an outboard motor where everybody could see it work. They didn't develop the steamboat to save the poor slaves from toiling at the oars. They saved their science for secret purposes. You can't altogether blame people for finding something beautiful and alluring in these promises of relief from the nightmares of uncertainty as to where tomorrow's bread's coming from, what will happen if you lose your job, what will happen if you get hurt or sick or too old to earn your living. Those problems make life harrowing. If all those ancient dramas could be made to end happily, life would lose its terrors for those who yearn for freedom from fear and want. But the ghastly thing about it is this. The government that guarantees all these things cannot guarantee its own life, its own freedom from bankruptcy, from the ruination of graft and greed, or the seizure of power by ambitious men. The nightmares are bound to return, and sleepless nights of ruin always follow the collapse of utopias. This magic government, which promised to end all worries, would do more for us than merely remove what's hateful and terrifying. These new almighty governments would take over also the loveliest things in life and love. Nowadays, as always, fathers and mothers still love each other, toil together for each other and for their children. But hot air merchants offer the government as a substitute for father love, husband and wife love, and for the love of duty-loving children toward their parents. Even in these tremendous, horrendous days of a world on fire, reeking with slaughter and shuddering before the chaotic problems ahead, I found strength to feel a strange shock and an odd terror not long ago in a little news item tossed away in a report of the minor legislation of a state assembly. A bill had passed without excitement, yet to my thinking it ought to have one front-page honors, or dishonors. An older law gave a pension to all needy people who reached the age of 65. The amendment said the pension should be paid to persons of 65 or more, whether or not their children or other close relatives were financially able to support them. In other words, a millionaire's old father or mother, grandfather or grandmother, uncle or invalid aunt would receive from the state $50 or $60 a month, just the same as the forlorn and lonely veteran who has no family left to rely on. It's been pointed out by statisticians that owing to the improvements in medical science, the number of old people is increasing enormously, and their expectancy of life also. Since many people believe the state should guarantee the care and education of the young are supposed to be all those under 21, a frightful load and increasing burdens to be placed on those between 21 and 65, for they'll be the only citizens from whom taxes can be exacted. Even aside from that, the act of the state legislature is both horrifying and terrifying. Horrifying because it legalizes heartlessness, destroys the basis of human society, the family. Terrifying because it shows how far Americanism can rot away from its former sense of individual responsibility. That very thing was attempted in the latest utopia. In Russia, when Lenin overthrew the cruel czars in 1918, one of the first laws passed abolished all life insurance, all power to bequeath property to widower children, all capital and income. The old people, invalids, and children were taken into the gentle care of the state. All wages and salaries from the skilled workers to the highest officers were the same. After 18 years of experiment, the new Constitution of 1936 restored the right to dispose of property by will. Life insurance was legalized and encouraged, and now Russians differ in earning power and in luxury as people do elsewhere. Once more, communism has proved its futility, its hatefulness, at frightful cost of life and treasure, humiliation, heartbreak, famine, murder, exile. Still, there are people who try to sell these ancient frauds and faded to us. Give all power to government to rule everything. Where'll government get its money for all this? Why, from you and you and you, and from her and him and me. The American people were brought up to believe that the state lives for them, works for them, as it should. The government is a group of men. The theory of our nation that this is a government of laws, not of men. Men pass in and out of favor and of office and die. The laws of justice and freedom don't die. They may be ignored, but they live on. Surely our magnificent warriors haven't been undergoing such unheard-of hardships abroad in order to come back to work for the state. Home for our homesick warriors doesn't mean passing from a regiment to a regimented job in a state-controlled industry. A man's home used to be his castle. In a regimented, state-controlled nation, a man's home must be a cell in a penitentiary, at best a beehive. Where the Dr. Martin's tradition of perfected organization only means universal application of a ball and chain. Our nation began as an adventure in freedom, a declaration of the independence and equality of the individual. That right is unalienable. A bad American may sell or give away his birthright for a mess of pottage. The whole nation isn't made up of Esau's whose bellies are their real gods. Those who call for a totalitarian government, no matter how they wrap it up in benevolence, are enemies of American individualism and independence. Edmund Burke described them long ago at the very time when our forefathers were setting up the individual as his own master. Of these totalitarians of then and now, Edmund Burke said to them, the will, the wish, the want, the liberty, the toil, the blood of individuals is as nothing. Individuality, he said, is left out of their scheme of government. The state is all in all. Today, the world's noisy with special pleaders who claim novelty for such statism as Burke was denouncing 150 years ago. Such statism is nearly as old as mankind. But the American ideal of the supremacy of the individual, that's the newest ideal in history. It's forever new, since a government of the people, for the people, by the people, renews its liberties with the dawn of every new day. It's our pride and glory to belong to be part of this republic of ours. And its chief pride and glory is that it doesn't swallow up or diminish the dignity of each individual man, woman, and child, but enlarges it. Its majesty is your majesty and mine. We are false to it when we forget our own rights, our duties, and our braveries. Sir Thomas Browne's magnificent line might be our watchword. A man should be something that men are not.
You've been listening to Rupert Hughes, world-renowned author, historian, and humorist. Rupert Hughes is heard each Saturday at this time over most of these stations. This program came from Hollywood. This is the National Broadcasting Company.